Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Lecture Series. Sit back, get comfortable, and let's go see what Marty has for us today.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another of the Wednesday morning lecture programs put on by the Peninsula Seniors right here in Rancho Palos Verdes. This morning, we're going to have an extremely interesting presentation by members of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team in World War II that turned out to be the most decorated military organization in history. What is unique about this group is that they were all Japanese Americans, many of whose families had been interned by the government. Yet they made up this unit, the 442nd and the 100th Battalion, and their record and medals exceeded any and every other group in our history. Our speakers this morning are from the Go for Broke National Education Center here in Torrance. Go for Broke was their motto, which meant go all out. Our speakers are the president, Mr. Don Nozay, and directors Ken Akuni and James Ogawa. We're going to have an interesting and historic presentation about the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. So please join me in welcoming our speakers.
My predecessor actually gave a fairly good history of the circumstances surrounding the discussion today. I've also brought with me just a very short documentary. It's about 30 minutes, really about the entire sort of segregated fighting units that served during World War II. And I think many of you have heard about some of them recently. First of all, the Go for Broke units recently just were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in November of this year. And it's the highest civilian honor that can be awarded to any citizen of the United States. And those collective units were awarded that Congressional Gold Medal in recognition of their bravery and service to the country. In the documentary as well, you're going to see mention of another two groups that were part of the segregated fighting units. You'll hear about the Tuskegee Airmen, and I think many of you may know that there's also a movie out right now called Red Tails about their meritorious service, and then also the Navajo Code Talkers. I think the thing that makes this such an interesting story is just for us in terms of what we do at the Go for Broke National Education Center is we really want to use the stories related to these segregated fighting units, in particular the Go for Broke fighting units, to teach Americans about your rights and responsibilities as American citizens. I think it was alluded to earlier that at the beginning of the war, as a result of the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, there were Americans that were denied the right to serve their country. They were born in America. They just happened to look Japanese and have come from Japanese parents. And so they were essentially classified 4C, which is an enemy alien. And unfortunately, they had to earn their right to serve their country, which they subsequently did, and were given the opportunity to serve their country with great distinction and valor. And it was mentioned before, out of the war, they became the most highly decorated unit for their size and length of service in military history in the United States. I think the other interesting fact is that there were, of the combined units, 21 of them were awarded the Medal of Honor. Now, I want to give you an interesting statistics. In the whole history of military history in the United States, you would expect this, in terms of the number of Medal of Honors that have been awarded, would be at the rate of probably less than 1/10 of 1% if you took the entire Medal of Honors that have been awarded. This group got awarded the Medal of Honor at a rate of probably just over 3%. So you can see the stark contrast in terms of the amount of bravery that was recognized by the U.S. By the government related to their meritorious service. What I'd like to do is just briefly kind of give you a little history here of the different segregated units. It's going to weigh a little bit heavier on the Go for Broke units, the Japanese American units that served, and then I'll ask our veterans to come up and go through a sort of a question and answer period. So I'm going to give you about 30 minutes. This was a documentary that was developed by David Ono. And he put it together actually just recently for our Evening of Aloha, which we just finished doing, which is our annual fundraiser. I wanted to also bring with me a couple of veterans that are part of these very distinguished Nisei or Japanese American fighting units. I have with me today Ken Akune, who's part of the MIS story and served in the MIS group, and Ken is on the right in his white shirt. And James Ogawa was part of the 100th 442nd Battalion as well, Regimental Combat Team. So I wanted to give them a chance to maybe tell a little bit about their experience, and then we would open it up here for questions from the audience.
My name is Ken Akune. I'm 88 years old. When I was a youngster of 10, my mother passed away, and my dad thought that he couldn't raise 9 kids. I'm the 4th of the child. The baby was about a year old. Anyway, he took us back to be raised by my grandmother. I stayed in Japan for 4.5 years. I went through their basic Japanese language school, or school actually. I came back when I was 15, and no sooner I came back, my dad was notified that my older sister was in critical condition, so he left. And my brother and I, my older brother and I, were the only ones here. And so I was lucky enough that an American teacher decided that she would take care of me for a short time. So she put me in the 8th grade, and after graduation, she felt that I needed somebody else to care for me because of my language skill was nil. Anyway, I stayed with this family until December 7th, 1941. No sooner that the war began, I happened to be in Los Angeles at the time. My hometown is in Turlock, California, which is in Central Cal. We sensed that something was going to happen because there was all kind of rumor that we were going to be relocated and stuff like that. So my brother and I decided to leave Los Angeles and go back to the country that we're more familiar with. And sure enough, in about April of 1942, there was a posting on a telephone pole about a half a mile away. And it's really amazing that we would walk up to there and just look at that notice, 9066, telling us that we were to be evacuated. And you know, if I grew up in the United States as all my life, until I was 18 at the time, I probably would have questioned it. But you know, when I came back to the United States, well, first of all, in Japan, you know, I was taught that the government was always right. You listen to what they say. Your loyalty is to your country. And all that teaching is, made on a daily basis, because at the time I was there, the military was very much in power in Japan, and everything was based around what the military was telling us. So when I came back here and missing all my basic English language school, they put me in the 8th grade. And I remember, being with this teacher's family. They were talking about the Constitution and everything else. And here I am looking at this and not understanding a bit of the thing that was said in there, about the human rights and all that kind of stuff. So for me, when this order came out, I didn't think about, my rights or anything else. All I remember is the fact that, whatever the government says, the best thing to be loyal to the United States was to obey the order and do what they tell us. So, you know, there's a Japanese saying that says "shikata ga nai," you know, can't be helped. You do what they tell you to do. So, you know, really, I didn't say anything. I didn't think about, you know, how come I'm being told that I have to go to camp where the Germans and the Italian people are not being asked the same thing. The teacher, by the way, was married to an Italian who was a dairyman, but he was a naturalized citizen of the United States. But he didn't have to go through that. Anyway, and at the same time, we were told that we are no longer being held as an American citizen. I mean, you're classified as 4C, enemy, alien, not desired for service. So all my buddies are going into service, and here we're sitting back there, you know, not being able to do anything. So anyway, around April, when the strawberries were just about ready to be harvested, we had to pack up with the family. My brother and I went into Merced Assembly Center. It was an assembly center. I don't know how many of us were there, but we were there until the permanent camp was established in Colorado. In September 1945, 42 that is, we were shipped to Colorado, a place called Amachi, Colorado, which had about 8,000 population in that camp. My brother and I briefly went out. There was some call for help for farm work, doing some beets work, you know, sugar beets. So we went out for about a month and a half, came back to the camp, and no sooner we came back, my brother came by and said, "Hey, Ken, you know, there's a recruiting office, and they're allowing us to volunteer." So he said he was going to go, and so I was playing football at the time, but I said, "No, if you're going to go, I'm going to go." So we both went over there, and until we went there, we didn't know what it was all about, but they were asking for anybody who had the language, a Japanese language school, if they would, you know, want to apply for, you know, volunteering. And knowing that all my buddies in high school were all going into service, going to the Air Force, Marines, or the Navy, Army, and suddenly they're telling us, we'll take you if you have the language skill. So, you know, suddenly, you know, I felt real good. I kind of felt that, gee, you know, I'm an American now. They're going to take us in. So naturally, my brother and I passed, went to the Army. I know there were quite a few objections from the elder Japanese Americans. I mean, the Japanese citizens that were residing in the United States. They were saying, you know, what are we going to tell your parents, you know, that you're going into the service? And I said, well, you know, my dad was a soldier in the Japanese Army before the war, so he'd understand, you know, why we had to go. And besides, I said that, you know, they wanted to know why we were volunteering. We were educated in Japan, and here they said that you say you're an American, but you're in this camp just like we are. We're foreigners, and we can't become citizens. And you're in this place as an American, and yet you're treated like an enemy alien. Well, my first thought, and I told them that, you know, the reason why we're here is that really the Japanese never had an opportunity to serve this country. World War II, one, in 1917, in that area, very few were in the age bracket. They were either too old or too young to serve in this country. I know there were some that served in World War I, but there were really not very many that could, serve the country itself. And so they couldn't trust us, so therefore it was something that we had to do. We had to change the way that the American people looked at us. We need to do something, and I said that the word was very cheap. You can say I'm loyal to the country and everything else, but the only way they'll believe us is if we're willing to give our lives. So anyway, I was real happy. For the first time, I felt like I was an American. And so anyway, we were sent to Minnesota for 6 months of extensive Japanese language, military language that we had to learn. We trained briefly with the 442nd that was in Mississippi to get our basic training. And then after we came back in the fall of 43 actually, it was the fall of 43, they formed a team, and I was one of the 10 guys that was shipped out to place unknown. We were shipped to California, into Wilmington here, and we waited for a ship to take us overseas. And after 60 days at sea, we finally went around Australia, went into Ceylon, Colombo, into Calcutta, and then finally we ended up in India. And from there, we were finally assigned to an organization that was part of the State Department, Office of War Information it was called. And our job was basically to interrogate prisoners of war and to do basic propaganda, trying to break the morale of the Japanese troops. Our job was to write leaflets, make broadcasts, and things like that. But my job, being the junior member of the group, most of the guys that I was with were either newspapermen background, or they were college students and stuff like that. So I had a lot to learn. They needed a flunky to take care of the odds and ends, so I was the flunky. But anyway, it was a good experience for me. And when the war ended, I decided, since my brother was shipped to the New Guinea area, Australia, New Guinea, into the Philippines, and into Japan, and he told me that he was in Japan to rescue the prisoners of war. So I decided that even though I was eligible for discharge from the service in China, I ended up in Burma in China, by the way, during the war. And I ended up in China when my brother said that he was in Japan. And so I said, oh, I'll go to Japan and see what was happening there. I was there in Japan. I landed in Japan, and for some reason, my dad got wind that my brother was in Tokyo, so he and my kid brother came to see him. And the day I landed, or the day after I landed in Japan, I happened to run into my brother at an elevator, and he says, Dad's in town, would you like to go see him? So he and I went up there to see him for the first time. And I found out then that my two younger brothers were in the Japanese military. Until then, we didn't know, what was happening. I know my dad, 2 years before that, had gone through the International Red Cross to find out where, how we were faring. And by the time I got the message, it was then 1944, and I said that both of us are okay. And right after we met my dad, he got the reply from the Red Cross saying that we were okay. So he already saw us by the time he got the message. But anyway, I stayed briefly in Japan, and I came back thinking that I would go back to school. But when my brother said that he wanted to go back to school, I thought that maybe it was my turn to sort of take care of the family. So I went back to Japan for 4.5 years. I worked on war crimes. I happened to land a job in the defense of the Japanese war criminals. That was the Tojo group. And until that trial was over. And after that, I was assigned to the prosecution attorney, and we both worked on the Admiral Toyota, who happened to be the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet at the termination of the war. And I ended that, and after that I ended up in this police court, which was trying acts of crime committed by Japanese against the occupation force, and also Americans committing crimes against the Japanese. So that's my basic military background.
The end of 1941, I was in Stockton packing salary for my job, and a friend of mine from Sacramento wrote to me. He said, "Come home. I want to talk to you. It's important." So I borrowed my boss's car, and I went home to Sacramento, and he says, "Let's join the Army." I said, "Okay, that's a good idea," because we both took junior ROTC in high school. So then I went back and took the car back, and he picked me up in Stockton. And then we went to the recruiting office. There were 4 different groups, like Air Corps, Navy, Marine, and the Army. So I tried to get into the Air Corps. I went to the Air Corps recruiter. He said, "No, we don't need you." So I said, "Fine." So I went to the Marine. The Marine said, "I don't need you. We don't need you." So I said, "Okay." So I tried the Navy. The Navy said, "If we go overseas, you sink the ship." He didn't know I'll be on it. Well, anyway, they turned me down. So I said, "Gee, the last one is the Army." So the Army took anyone if they took me. Anyway, so at that time I was 18. And we had to get the parent consent to join the Army, because we didn't want I didn't want my parent to know I was going in the Army. So I had to forge his name to get into the Army. So, well, anyway, I got in, and we went to Presidio, San Francisco. And then from there, we went to Little Rock, Arkansas for a basic training. After the basic training, 13 weeks of basic training, we went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. That's where they took our arms away and put us in a headquarters department. It was a DEML, the Detached Enlisted Men List, and -J for whatever you want to think it was. Anyway, then a year later, we organized the 442 regiment. When we organized that, I went as a cadre to the unit, and we took basic training all over again. But before that, when I first went to Fort Leonard, Missouri, it was a barrack that it was empty, and the lot was all weeds and weeds. So they wanted me to clean up. I said, "I'm from the farm. I don't want to work and clean up the yard." So I said, "Gee," I told them I want to be a dining room orderly. So they said, "Okay." I was a dining room orderly. Then I said to myself, what am I doing? I don't learn anything by being a dining room orderly. So I told him, I want to be a cook. So I was cook for 1 year, and then we went to Camp Shelby, Missouri, as cadre. In 1943, or was it 44, we went to Italy on a Liberty ship. It took us 29 days to get to Italy because the ship went zigzag every 7 minutes to keep so the torpedo won't hit us. And I ended up in Naples. And then I joined them in Anzio. At that time, I was a replacement for the 100th Battalion. 100th Battalion with the Hawaiian National Guard. And they trained at Fort McCoy in Wisconsin. And they were in Camp Shelby for a short time, and they were shipped overseas. Well, anyway, later I was a second replacement for the 100th, and I joined them in Anzio. And we went all the way down to Arno River. So we got to see the Tower of Pisa, and then we came back. Then they shipped us to France, and we fought in France for a while. And then in Italy and France, in the wintertime, it was very cold. Our feet got wet, and we couldn't change because we're in the front. So anyway, I got frozen feet, trench foot, they call it. And then I suffered from that. So later part of the war, I was in the hospital for 3 months. And then I was reclassified and I went to Ordnance Company. And then from France I went, since I was replacement, I went replacement for, or not a replacement, I was assigned to an Ordnance Company. We went to Germany and we stayed there from about 3 to 6 months. And then I had enough points to come home, so I came home in November of 45.
When James went into the service, you know, there's Japanese Americans that were already in the service. Their rifles were taken away and they were discharged because they were of Japanese descent. And so it's unusual for James, who came in 1940, early 42, that they were recruiting people and took him in, but they were also discharging people, you know, at the same time. In fact, there was, when I volunteered in 1942, two of the guys were guys that were discharged in early 1942. But these guys were real loyal, as far as I'm concerned, the most loyal guys, because if they would have kicked me out of service, I would have never gone back to volunteer. But anyway, in my case, you know, I had to be 21. Although the draft age was 18, in our case, they weren't taking us in the draft, so therefore they said that I had to volunteer to the regular Army. And to be a regular Army, you had to be 21. And I wasn't 21, I was 19. Fortunately, my older brother was 22, and he was the only one that could sign me in, so that's the way I got in.
They wanted to know the actual casualties related to the 100th, 442nd. Do you know those?
I think the dead was something like 800.
800.
I think they turned the regiment over around 3 times. A regiment being about 3,000, they ended up, you know, having over 10,000. But, you know, because of the casualty. I think almost, I would say maybe 80% had Purple Hearts. Yeah. And they had a tremendous amount of casualties. In the Pacific, we were a little different. I know I didn't say too much, but there were roughly 3,000 of us in the field at the termination of war. We were in every unit, every battle, every landing that was made in the Pacific theater. Not as a unit, but maybe one or two, maybe half a dozen, a team of, my brother, without any parachute training, was assigned to the 501st paratroopers that landed on a corregidor. And he had no training. All they told him, he says, okay, took him to the outhouse and told him to, just step out and that would be it. And so when they went in, I mean, when you're young, you don't think of, being killed or die or anything like that. So, he went up there and he didn't even have his helmet or anything. Some officer that was with him didn't like him, I guess. And they took his rifle and everything else, and by the time he got to the plane, he had nothing but himself, not even a parachute. And so once he got on the plane, the buddies over there said, hey, you need something. So they gave him a parachute, they gave him a machine gun to drop off, and they jumped off at around 300 feet. And they were lucky. The casualty rate on that jump was quite high, but like being an innocent person, never jumped before, he lucked out, and he landed on the island on the side. And he was telling me at the time that he started to climb back up, and right away the guys on top thought he was an enemy, so they had the rifles on him. But fortunately, one of the sergeants recognized him, and he was pulled up,
I think the only other thing I wanted to mention is James talked about being a replacement for the 100th. The 100th were the initial group that went over. They went through such significant casualties that they were trying to replace the 100th with a lot of the 442nd new recruits that were coming in. And in fact, I think a lot of the 442nd, actually they cut their basics short. I know that in talking with a number of the veterans, they literally maybe got, 6 of 13 weeks and then were shipped out because they were trying to replace the 100th. They went through massive casualties. When we talked about I think you heard they talked about the rescue of the Lost Battalion. They went through that battle, and it's probably considered to be one of the top 10 military battles of World War II. They sustained approximately about 800 casualties. And the next day, when they were asked to report for, essentially to report for lineup, and the commanding officer said, well, where is everybody? I said I wanted a complete, formation, in front of me today, and there were just literally a handful of people because they had seen so many casualties.
Thank you for watching the Peninsula Seniors Lecture Series. I'm Betty Wheaton. See you next time.